I'll tell you what I hope to do, and in this time, uh, I'm going to do a presentation for about 20 minutes, roughly, and then I'll ask you to do an experiential thing with me, which I'll share with you how to go about it, and then afterwards we can have conversation about what your experience was and how you see perhaps it applying to the work that you do. Now, I've been told to not be too pedantic, which being an old university professor, I have a tendency to do, and also, being from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I like to bullshit a lot, so that I'll try to limit that a little bit. There's a lot of concepts in what I'm going to present. And of course, in this time frame, we don't have time to drill down into what are very significant philosophical concepts that provide an underpinning for an existential approach to psychodynamic therapies. I want to focus on the work of a man named Eugene Gendlin, who taught at the University of Chicago for many, many years. And developed something. Well, you may know, some of you may know, focusing as a method. How many of you have heard of that? Okay, so he that was a condensed version that he created in order to try to communicate what he had discovered from his research into what made psychotherapy work. And the foundations of his work, however, are rooted in the work of Edmund Husserl and Merleau-Ponty and other existential thinkers. His most extensive book that explains all this is a book called Experiencing and the Creation of Meaning, and that precedes a number of his other works. He was the head of research of the, he was the editor of Psychotherapy Research and Review through the APA for about 20 years. And what led him to do the research on what made therapy work was his effort to try to understand how thinking and feeling worked together as people explored their experience. And focusing was kind of a operational outcome of this work. He really attempted, again, these are my views, so take them for what they are. So he combined Husserl's concept of intersubjective validation, some of Lacan's, at least this is what I did, some of Lacan's ideas on subjectivity, and key concepts in understanding the impact of language in the therapeutic encounter. He was particularly interested in the relationship between thinking and imaging and what he called the felt sense of the body, the direct felt sense. That's a term that he developed. Now, and I would go further. He really, in my opinion, operationalized the idea of subjectivity as the source of the individual's felt sense of self. And he put this concept into action in the therapeutic encounter and dialogue between the therapist and the patient. So there were two dialogues going on between the therapist and the patient, and within the therapist and within the patient. Now, I also would like to, as you know, in therapy, you can bring up any sort of topic. And I think it's important, by the way, to understand how language and meaning are cohabited within the therapeutic encounter, which Gendlin focused on, especially as relates to the person's direct experience of themselves in the room with the other. This was, we would call the therapist's use of self as a touchstone for the therapeutic encounter, which I'm sure a number of you are familiar with. And I would say how subjectivities talk to each other in the present. And of course, in therapy, you can bring up the past, the present, the anticipated future, relationship, a dream. I used movies a lot, the moving ones. Whatever becomes a central point in a particular encounter in the present, in the room, and in between the therapist and the patient. I'd also like to point out that Ronnie Lang, our patron saint, in my opinion, made a significant contribution to my thinking in all of his work, but in particular, his books on interpersonal perception, and one of my favorites, Knots. Now, in working with people, I suggest listening in a feelingful way to the existential situation being unfolded in a session by noting your own experience as you listen, noting what sticks with you, not why it sticks with you, but what sticks with you. How does it feel? And exploring, to go a little further, if I'm getting too long-winded, James, tell me. I just see James as J. So exploring the nature of subjectivity as it appears in the work of Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, Lacan, and Gendlin, the question arises: how does intersubjectivity play a role in presence in therapeutic encounter? How do our pre-existing assumptions, presuppositions color our perception of the patient and their presenting self? How do you know when you've established a felt connection with the patient? Gendlin's answer to this was to access a direct felt bodily experience as you listen. In his work, he thought that one would have a feeling, and then a thought or image might come to mind that addresses that feeling or encapsulates it in some way. I went further to say you could have an image and then access the feeling to which it's attached. I applied this in the development of my work on the moving film experience as to what made movies moving, something which I've evolved over many years since I did that research on my doctoral work, and have applied in many areas of life. This might be a good stopping point before I ask you to do some focusing. If you have any questions, I'll answer them, or we can do the experiential work, and then we can talk more directly about what your experience is. Any comments? I guess not. Okay. You change your mind, let me know. So I will suggest you do a very simple version of this. And perhaps many of you may be already familiar with it in your own way. Sometimes what I would do to invite people to enter into what I might call a state of focusing is, first of all, to allow yourself to breathe into your belly and notice what you find there when you do it. Not what you think, but what you feel. There's no right or wrong answer to this. It's what is there. And is there, if you allow yourself to bring to mind some emotionally toned moment that's going on in your life right now. You don't have to tell anybody what it is. You don't have to share any of this if you don't want to. It's up to you. But when something comes to mind for you, you may notice that the feeling, your direct felt experience in your gut may change. See if you can notice that change. Is there a thought or image that may come to mind from that changed feeling that has something to do with the moment that I suggested you bring to mind? As you allow that to come to your mind, does that feeling in your gut change again, or does it remain the same? How does it affect your breathing? If you allow yourself to move through this process, allowing the feeling to change if it does, and see if an image or thought comes to mind that addresses that feeling, and let that process go on, or notice where it stops and what's that feel like, and stay with that feeling and see if by being present with that feeling it might change. And if not, what does that feel like? Notice if you're holding your breath. Do you arrive at any place where the thoughts or feelings you have about this moment that I suggested you allow to come to mind has changed? Has it deepened? Has it resolved? Has it moved to a different place? Not do you think it arrived at a different place? Does it feel like it arrived at a different place for you? No one knows the answer to that except you. If you feel that you've arrived at a sense of completion with your inner process, then let yourself note what the phases were, what happened as you move through the process. I usually suggest that people write this down, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Make a mental note. And see if the process of what came to mind in the felt sense arrive at a natural stopping point for you. Give you a moment to complete that. Okay. Now, thank you for doing that to the extent that you did. And would anybody be willing to share what their experience was? I guess not. Can I encourage you?
I can say something.
Well, thank you.
Sure. My name is Nurit,
Hi.
and I'm sorry I'm not showing my face. I'm still in my morning garb. But
You're
uh,
forgiven.
what? First of all, when you said that, I realized that I was not in my felt sense. That was the first thing I noticed.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then I checked my breath, and I really gulped it. It felt really good in my gut to have this kind of extra depth to my breath. And then my felt sense, which I had it already from the moment I woke up this morning, was how grateful I am for this life.
Hmm.
And it kept changing in a way that all of a sudden I saw some humor in, I had this kind of how can I say, like lightness about it. It was not a heavy thing. I'm grateful, it was more like, because I also saw some birds. I opened my eyes and there were some birds on my deck, which made me even feel more kind of happy. So that's all what I can say, but it definitely, I would like to do it again and go deeper into that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Anybody else?
Share, if that's okay.
Hi.
Hi, I had just come back from my exercise class and rode my bike. I live in Vancouver, Canada, and so it's typical rainy weather here, but it was fresh and in spring. So I was feeling pretty relaxed when we started this. And I've been doing a yoga class that sort of puts us through the similar kind of process. So what I noticed today is often when I first start to breathe deeply into my belly is I feel a little tightness in my chest. Excuse me, I have to buzz my husband in, sorry. He forgot his keys, so sorry about that. And so I felt a bit tightness and I could feel my breath, I was noticing my breathing. I was noticing it. And then it softened, it felt softer. And then I felt like I wasn't noticing my breathing anymore. It was just flowing. And I felt very kind of floaty in a way, but it was very easy. It was easy. It wasn't an effort in the same way as when I started. And I felt just very relaxed and again, happy to be here. I felt a bit of contentment, whatever that feels like, but pretty relaxed.
May I ask, whenever I asked you to think about some emotionally toned moments, did something come to mind?
Not,
and did it change how you felt? Were you aware of it?
Nothing came to mind. No image, a wave, a feeling of a wave. The idea of a wave came to mind, I guess, but I didn't visualize a wave. It just felt like I was in a wave. It was pleasurable. And that's, I think, the overriding felt sense was one of enjoyment and pleasure. Again, it initially started with a bit of tightness in my upper chest when I first took the first breath. Yeah.
So there was a shift.
That's a shift. I generally probably, if this is me adding not what I felt at the time, but I think I get a bit nervous when I am doing things like this in a group format and might talk about it. I generally don't talk, so I'm taking a bit of a risk today.
I appreciate your talking. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for sharing some of your experience.
Thank you.
I think that shift, is very important. What Gendlin referred to that as an experiential shift. And it's very interesting because in his work, what he noted was that the people who had the most successful outcomes in therapy were the ones that were able to learn this method and then apply it in their lives. And of course, it's easier for some than for others. But that was his understanding. That's the operationalization of subjectivity that he tried to bring to the fore. And thank you. Anybody else? Any observations about your experience?
I can talk about my experience.
Okay.
When I breathed deeply into my belly, I felt aware of there was a sensation of a platform, like a bottom,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere above my pelvic floor and below my belly button, in the middle of my body.
Mm-hmm.
About the shape of my hands if they were resting on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I thought about a situation in my life, I thought about a family member that I was worried about. And in that moment, what shifted was a couple of things shifted. So, what dimly began as an image of my hands in that inside my body shifted to the hands of the Buddha. And simultaneously, there was a rush of an upward rush from my solar plexus up into my chest of sadness.
Mm.
Like the precursor to tears
Mm-hmm.
was the thought I had about it, but it was really an upwelling, like a fountain, internally, of softness and aching, and I don't know how else to say it other than sadness. And I kept breathing into it, and yeah, it I think it would have probably kept changing, and gone elsewhere, but then it was time to end the exercise.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, your sense that that might have continued um, changing is probably that internal sense of yours is probably correct, that it might have gone someplace more for you. And I'm sorry that I interrupted your process, but I appreciate your sharing what it was like for you in such a clear way. And I think that the way in which you move through that in yourself, if you were to pay attention in a therapeutic encounter with somebody, that similar process would be operating in them, from Gendlin's point of view, as well as in yourself. And that would be where the therapeutic encounter would take place, within those mutual subjectivities, understanding each other.
Yes, this is something that I do, and I'm not trained in Gendlin's work, but I am trained in a lot of different somatic approaches, and I'm a dance movement therapist, so I use these kinds of things often.
You're a natural then. That's not fair.
It's something I've been doing for decades. Yeah, yeah, and I wanted to learn more about Gendlin's work. Of course, I knew about him, but not in a deep way.
Well, a
So
lot of people are not familiar with the more in-depth where this came from, why I was drawn to understanding his work more fully, because of the phenomenological and existential roots of his thinking. because he, basically he was a philosophy professor in a lot of ways. And if you ever read the first book that I mentioned earlier, Experiencing the Creation of Meaning, probably give you a headache because it's all references to philosophical works and so on and so forth. And which I enjoy, but not everybody wants to spend the time on it, which is why Gendlin decided to develop the focusing method as a way of communicating what he was doing to a wider audience and making it a technique, as it were, which he particularly didn't really like to do, but he figured that was the only way that he was ever going to get anybody to pay any attention to it, was to put it in a small, when he put this out initially, it was in a small paperback book that, I don't know, I may still have a copy of that around. But he felt at the time, with what was going on, that was the only way that people would pay any attention. Didn't matter about the research and all the articles and all the other stuff. But thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. Okay. Michael's telling me he has to go meet with his son on the chat. So thank you. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to share? No? Okay. Well, would you have any questions about this method? I mean, I'm hoping that I'm interrupting myself, but I'm hoping that the introduction to this is a way of introducing something. I think that if you're therapists or have experience with therapy, that you already kind of know within yourself and do in your own way, right? And it's a way of saying, if you listen to, as you listen to someone talking, and you pay attention to what sticks with you emotionally, not and don't go into thinking about what it might mean to them, although that's something naturally that will occur. But ask yourself if you and they are connected in some kind of feelingful way. And this is what Gendlin's research was about, that if that connection wasn't there in some way, then the therapy would not work as well as it might. And of course, that's not always possible to connect with everybody, but you can always connect with yourself. Any questions?
Sandy, would you say, I mean, focusing is sort of like it's a formal procedure in a way, but it seems like it's based in this in the study of psychotherapy, and I could see how maybe it's also mirrored in a natural conversation that you're
Yes.
that you're bringing into the room something, if it seems like the patient is talking about something without talking about how they feel about it, you might ask them how they feel about it, or suggest how you feel about it, but then something else happens. They try it on, just like in the procedure you took us through. You try it on in a way, and then something else happens. So it seems like there's the procedure itself, but there's also a way that Gendlin is proposing something about how therapy works, which is to say there's the experience, and then the thinking about it is there to sort of is more reflective. You're reflecting on not so much trying to figure out what theory fits to the experience so much, but rather thinking, reflecting on the experience, and maybe seeing what word or association or image or anything like that comes up, and then that becomes a way of taking it further. But it seems to suggest something about how it's not about how there's experience, which is primary, and then thinking it's being offered in a way that's sort of reflective or meditative on that, rather than trying to figure it all out and put it into a theory.
It's really allowing what's emerging from the experience of you in the room with this person, and what has come to the fore, and how you feel in listening. Do you feel that they're being genuine? Do you feel this is legit? Do you feel that they're telling you the truth? Do you feel that they're trying to con you? You know, all the things that you usually would imagine might go on. And of course, then the question is, well, do you feel they're in what they're saying? Mm-hmm. And you say, well, ask them how they feel as they're telling you that. And are you drawn to ask them that question? Mm-hmm. How are you feeling about what you're saying right now? Mm-hmm. You know, and that feeling that you might have to feel drawn to ask that question is because that's what's going on inside of you, because you're not sure. Or you're saying, well, maybe this would be helpful to move this dialogue forward in a useful way. And, you know, so that's really, I mean, this is the therapist's use of self. This is listening, which you're doing all the time. You know, when you're in the room, you're always listening. You're searching internally, you know, but it's in the present. And going back to what you said about the theoretical, you know, well, is it what model fits whatever they're expressing? Well, that's part of your training. That's going to come up in you in some way. But does that cloud your listening in the present to what's happening with this person in the moment? Because that's where therapy is happening. It's happening in the moment. It's not happening theoretically. It's not happening because, you know, Freud said X or Lang said Y. It's happening in the present because there's just you and them. Mm-hmm. You know, and your subjectivity and their subjectivity, because they have one. You know, I mean, it's interesting. You know, I remember there's a guy who's a filmmaker, and he teaches you know, filmmaking, storytelling and stuff. And he liked to say, you know, there are some people that could have a horrible situation in their lives. You know, somebody passed away suddenly in an accident, whatever it was. And they will tell that story and it'll be boring. But somebody else, you know, their washing machine could have broken down that day. And they'll tell that story and everybody will just be on edge listening to them tell that story of how their washing machine broke down. Mm-hmm. There's some way of inhabiting what you're saying and how you're saying it to the other. And you have to listen as you do. And you're sorting, you know, you have a sorting demon in your head as you're going through listening to somebody represent something to you. After all, this is they walked in the room and this is the story they decided they wanted to tell their therapist. Mm-hmm. And in their head, they had an idea of what a therapist was, right? Might not have been you. And that's the idea they had in their head. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I hope that's helpful. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Oh, where are you?
Yes, yeah, my name is Nurit. Yeah. So I'm not a therapist, but I have a son who is schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. And last time I saw him, I barely could breathe. And it was not anything that he said or acted, but we have a long history of all kinds of twists and turns.
Of course.
And I just noticed that it was very hard for me to just breathe normally. And at that point, I did not know whether I should remove myself from this situation or kind of stay with it. And the truth is that I did stay with it, and it changed. I later it was a really a wonderful, like very pleasurable encounter. But there was this moment where I couldn't breathe very well, and I did not, and I kept asking myself, why is that? Why is that? And I did not know if it's my memories of him or actually something that I was perceiving from him.
Could have been a little of both. But it's interesting that you stayed with it and it changed. It ended up being a good encounter. So what did you learn from that moment?
That my amygdala is overreactive accordingly to the past. And but at the same time, I do have to watch. I still have to be vigilant.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Somebody inside there has to be vigilant. One way to do that is to pay attention to how you feel in your gut. Yes. Hi, Don.
I sort of have a problem with this.
Sure.
And it surprises me that Gendlin took his work in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
A paper of his I really like, from 1978 on Heidegger, called Befindlichkeit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's an excellent paper, and is not, in my mind, subjectivistic in the way that this is.
Mm-hmm.
Heidegger wasn't about subjectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Transcended that whole problematic. And Heidegger we don't feel our feelings. What we feel is our situation. And
Mm-hmm.
our anger isn't in our body, it's in the guy who cut us off in traffic. If you get what I mean, that
I understand,
and in Befindlichkeit, he has a wonderful articulation of a therapy session where somebody can't quite get at, and then refines, and this doesn't fit, and then refines.
Mm-hmm.
But it's to do with Befindlichkeit, with how.
Tom, I would say, if I may interject, and I think it's a very good point you're making. I don't want to misrepresent him. I think that the Heideggerian roots of some of his thinking that he later on went to research and apply in a therapeutic setting has to do with caring, which I think was very important in his understanding of the therapeutic encounter. Remember, he worked with Carl Rogers at the University of Chicago for a long time. And he liked Rogers, but he also didn't think Rogers was a very deep thinker, shall we say. and Gendlin was, he really did his homework. So that's where I would say the crossing point is. He was not implying, the subjectivistic term. He was not saying your subjective reality is all that you have. That was not him. He was saying it was dialogical. It was, in the Buberian sense, we're here together. This is going on. It's this, you brought this here. You're a human being. You have reactions. I have reactions. It's not like it's all in your head. So I don't mean to imply that.
Well, or in your body.
It's a dialectic.
Well, yes, Heidegger was very critical of the Buber, I, thou.
I understand, philosophers have differences. I know he was critical of Husserl too. That's why he took his seat.
But I'm not trying to make this intellectual as much as to get at what it's getting at, which is that this turn toward I think of therapy as that I often want to let myself be put in the grip of that which is gripping the person I'm working with.
Yes.
To get at that ephemeral something, and where it moves me, where it moves them.
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't locate that anywhere in space or body.
Well, do you have a feeling for it as you do it? I mean, I don't mean a ethereal kind of
An
emotion.
attunement.
Yeah. Do you
I
have?
would call it an attunement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that term.
Yeah.
How do you know that you have the attunement? What lets you know that in your experience? Like right now, I asked you a question. What lets you know that you have a question about it?
That to me is kind of a crazy making question.
That's the point. I understand what you're saying. I was just fucking with you a little bit, but I get your points, and but my point is, again, only it's obviously a broader topic, and I'd be delighted to have the conversation with you. But for this instance, I think what's valuable is the what you're saying is attunement. I love that term, and I think that is what one needs to do. And I think that's what Gendlin was also alluding to throughout his work, that I think the focusing which he did in order to kind of transmit this in some way that's very simple. He hated basically the fact that that book sold a gazillion copies and made him famous, and nobody read the other stuff. He told me that personally. So that's the and which would make sense if you knew him at all or had a chance to talk to him. He was very philosophically oriented. But I like attunement. I think that is a easily acceptable term, and I think we operate in different ways. Some people more in their body and reference it more. Some people more in their thoughts or images and reference those more. And I think you can go in either direction. Now, I mean, when I did my work, Gendlin was going from felt sense to image, but he didn't say you could go the other way. I did.
Oh.
Now, one thing along the lines of these questions, though, I think that's interesting is the separation between the thinking and the feeling. As far as I take it, there's a way in which what Gendlin is doing is maybe operationalizing or trying to operationalize meditative thinking, perhaps as Heidegger would think about it, but because it's reflective, it's supposed to be a type of thinking that furthers experience, not tries to pin it down or figure it out or
Yeah.
and so it's a type of thinking that reflects and furthers experiencing. And so
Yes.
but I think one thing that's interesting that you remind me of, Tom, with your objection is that Heidegger's language would never separate the two, I don't think. I mean, that it would all this thinking and feeling as being separated is an interesting issue, because it's not really like Freud seemed to think that was a neurotic thing, that we felt those things to be very separate, that you have feeling and you either are feeling or you are thinking. And that's just sort of, if you're more hysteric, you feel instead of think, and if you're more obsessional, you think instead of feel. I think on the one hand, Gendlin's approach seems to be bring them back together in some way that cooperates with one another. Now, a fine point to be made seems to be that there's still a way in which his approach is holds the two as separate things, which at least are supporting one another. But Heidegger would say it's all part of being. You can't just
I think Gendlin would agree with that. I mean, it's not isomorphism in that sense of the Gestalt sense. I think more it is dialectical, as I mentioned earlier, and it's a matter of focus. I don't think Gendlin would separate the person and their subjectivity from the field, from the engagement with what's coming at them. He was not an adherent of gustatory philosophies. He was more, I think, Sartrean than that, to tell you the truth. So that's my opinion. But I think that it was aimed at the enabling people to recognize that their experience can be thought through or felt through, and that they were all operating at the same time was a matter of focus, of where one went. When I was doing my work on films, I would say that, you don't think through a movie, you feel through a movie. And you don't really know about the film until it's over. And when you walk out of the theater, then I got that, right? But there are moments as you move through the film, I like Lacan's term of the bursting forth of the real, where and again, movie is a arbitrary, but clearly modern, postmodern experience, that as you watch something and it's ordinary and something happens and suddenly it changes for you. Doesn't have to change for everybody else, but it changes for you. And in that instance, that experience changes. Something is different. And then when you walk out, and you may have all had that experience of, something was moving to you about whatever this film was. And you leave with whoever you're with, and you are like shaken somehow and moved deeply, and your partner says, let's go have a pizza. Didn't do shit to them. That's one of the things that led me to doing the research, because I had those kinds of experiences. And I said, how could you possibly not get that?
That could also be somebody's defensive, kicking in. They don't want to be vulnerable. I mean, when something moves us,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are emotionally affected by it. And yet, maybe I don't want even my own wife to see me cry, because I don't want to appear vulnerable. But I think the point I wanted to mention about is Tom, reflecting on Tom, because I definitely do not see Heidegger's philosophy as excluding, the human element, the emotional element. He was just more of a cerebral dude, but he accounted for all kinds of depth dimensions. But what's interesting about him is that he wanted to deny the unconscious. When the notion of being and the notion of truth, of aletheia, of disclosedness, that being is always there, but it's hidden. So it really opens itself up to a psychoanalytic philosophy. It's just a matter of degree that we want to focus on, whether it be the cerebral, whether it be the affect, whether it be the somatic. I think it's all there. And I also think it's there in Freud, James. It's just privileging certain or emphasizing certain things over the other in that moment. And maybe therapy is something like that. It's in that moment. And Sandy, I want to just mention briefly that this is funny, because I was 20 years old, and I was my first volunteer job was at a crisis center, a crisis intervention agency, and I just declared my major in psychology. And I volunteered there, and the training was from a PhD in philosophy who got a second PhD in counseling. And what did he train us in? Focusing. So my first exposure to psychology is Gendlin, and he even recommended we buy, and I did, a book by Gendlin called "Let Your Body Interpret Your Dreams."
Yes.
I read that before Freud's interpretation of dreams.
That's impressive. Yeah, there's another book by Gendlin. Well, actually, some people who study with Gendlin, which I thought was very philosophical, called The Experience of Introversion. And I can't tell you the name of the authors of that, but it was directly related to Gendlin's work and Merleau-Ponty. And I think Tom, I think that Gendlin's primary influence and window to Heidegger, et cetera, and phenomenology was Merleau-Ponty. I think that was in his writings. And therein, I think, of course, if you know Merleau-Ponty's work on the primacy of perception, a sense and nonsense, and the child's relationships with others, which I think is just brilliant. He's very much about an embodied presence, right? Which to me is his way of taking Heidegger's idea of thrownness, right? And saying, yes, thrownness. I mean, his last book, The Invisible and the Visible and the Invisible, which I wish he'd lived longer, he called that brute being, right? Now, given living through World War II and all of the crap that went on, brute being is probably a really good name for it. So I hear what you're saying. I think Gendlin was very much aware of not wanting to be, categorized as a subjectivist in that way. That's my opinion. But I think the nature of subjectivity and how that dialogue happens in the therapeutic encounter was very focused for him. And that's why he did his research in that way. Are you leaning forward to say something, Tom? Or by the way, thanks for your article. Look forward to seeing it.
I accidentally clicked that link and now I don't know how to turn it off. So I'm listening to a video someone sent.
Oh. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. That's a great story, by the way. Anybody else? I mean, I could easily go off into these philosophical conversations and I would enjoy them tremendously, but I don't want to, I don't want to, explode anybody's heads. I think we could all, have a couple of beers and go on for hours. And we need Thompson here too, because, he loves to dwell deeply into these things. Any other questions, comments?
Just a thought here. It seems like to me that there's so many different overlapping theorists, philosophers, analysts who are all grappling with the same thing. I mean, like for instance, much of the talk that you had today, Sandy, could have applied to Jung. I think Jana and Lisa in particular have some Jungian backgrounds.
I agree with that.
And yet, who gets to own these ideas? I mean, nobody does. I mean, we gravitate toward it. Some people are more thinking, some are more feeling, some are more somatic. They're more related to the earth, the environment, the reality. Look at Lacan. Lacan knew how to poach. I mean, he knew how to take a lot of. Oh yeah. Oh, he was great at that. So at the same time, these are different models for, giving us a way of viewing the world, viewing the big picture.
Well, the thing I liked about Gendlin, and the reason I specialized in that for this particular talk because of the time frame, was that he really did the research. He actually went in and did this research with real people and real therapists and tracked it and saw what the results were. Now, as you know, we live in an evidence-based world these days, and he anticipated this and in a way created a foundation a brilliant foundation. I mean, he edited that journal for 20 years of saying, all of you, scientific, people out there that say it's got to be this way, that way, this way, and then psychoanalysis is bullshit, and Jung is, he's crazy, and yada, 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 he went and said, well, this is the way therapy gets better. Here's the data. Here's the cases. Here's the data. Look at it. Look at the results. And I love that about him because, he was not by nature a therapist per se. He was a philosopher, and I thought that took at that time, especially in those moments where he, took on that task, that I thought that took a lot of courage on his part to do that and stand up for, some would have said a humanistic approach or whatever. I mean, I never liked those terms, but my point was he did it, and the articles are there, the research is there, 20 years worth. They didn't fire him, and whenever I would personally talk to some of these, people who are very antithetical, in effect, to, their view of therapy is that basically you should train master's therapists simply to apply the discoveries of cognitive behavioral interventions that work in the lab, and and that's all therapy should be. Just be, kind of like lines of doing laser surgery, like in the old Soviet Union, you just line them up and then they just spin them on the wheel and each one would get it, right? And there are these people out there. I go to APA from time to time, I talk to them, and whenever you say, well, what about this? They don't even know what you're talking about. They don't know about their research. Well, it's clinical research. I mean, you can't really be, you need to have outcome studies, evidence-based studies, right? That show before and after results.
Yeah, we all know identity politics and bullshit when we hear it.
Well, if you ask people their experience and how they feeling, what's going on in their lives, they getting along with their children, their spouse, their boss, are they working, are they having psychotic episodes still, are they having nightmares, still, I mean, those are evident, that's clinical work, right? That things change.
Well, he operationalized these things enough, and to capture that really incredible something that he's getting at that makes the difference. Why did that not find its way into so-called outcome research?
Well, I think it has, actually. I mean, he was doing outcome research. That was part of why. But I'm sure there's students of his, and that have continued this in various ways. And it's still, so, but the movement, as within the medical psychology circles has been more and more towards the utilization of antipsychotic drugs and other anti-anxiety drugs and what have you, and as well as less and less towards training people to be therapists.
Well, besides people who might think like Gendlin or who think more psychoanalytically or existentially, would mock the idea that we could measure anything about experience. I mean, that's so ridiculous. And so, even if we could develop a study that measured outcomes, and we would know that we're bullshitting people.
Well, no, I think that's easy to do. You get their anxiety measure, you know, all these things. You just got
Measure their anxiety.
There are anxiety measures that are, used all the time.
I'm aware of those.
Those are tests. They say yes, they say no. I mean, look, Exner came along and did the Rorschach and decided to come up with a scoring system, right? Now, I learned the Rorschach before Exner came along, and then I had to learn Exner. Okay, and Rorschach was a Jungian. I mean, he developed this in Switzerland out of hundreds of ink blots, right? And it was all about evoking people's responses to these ink blots. And he chose the ones that he thought worked best. And Exner came along and actually developed a scoring system. Did you learn the scoring system?
Oh
in
yeah,
school?
it's super elaborate and
I know it's it, boy.
I was on number 3 when I was trained. Number
Uh-huh.
3. Does it still exist? Do they still use it, or is it obsolete
Oh,
now?
I'm sure. I don't know. Ask James. He just got his PhD and his license. Tell with James, they
no,
still.
well, yeah, people don't use it.
Mhm.
It's so convoluted, you
Oh.
know. It's a super. It'd be interesting as an experience, but again, even though they developed some sort of scoring system, that's probably the thing that's least interesting about it. You would ask them to project on it, and you'd have an interesting conversation. That would be interesting, but
That's right. That's right.
but to score it, who would care about that? I mean, I don't think people really trust that, and I think that people don't use it.
They still teach it in some PsyD programs.
They do, yeah, but that doesn't mean people use it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, see,
right.
But projective tests of all sorts, whether it's draw a person test, draw a tree person test, tell us, I mean, all these kinds of things that were evolved over time, right, are basically about the engagement with the person, and like the Rorschach go, okay, so, if that somebody gives a response and they're in the 2% on the first card, it will raise your eyebrows a little bit, say, that's interesting, but if you give a draw a person test to somebody and they do this beautiful figure from the side, you figure they probably went to art classes, right? So, I mean,
No, they're paranoid.
it could be, but a lot of these things evoke their projective tests, are kind to get you to project things onto something. Now, personally, I like to work with dreams. I like moving film experiences, because nobody owns those. You go to a movie, it's not your images. You don't own those. Somebody made that crap up, right? But you're sitting there and you're having an experience, and then somehow later on, and I've had done this for years, 25 years later, ask somebody to their most moving film experience that touched them in some way. Tell me what it is, and it's some movie they saw when they were 12 years old with their parents. And I've had filmmakers, right? Very sophisticated guys who've done, Hollywood movies, asked them this question. The Music Man is what they come up with.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I think, now that's interesting. How come that's stuck around? You see?
Well, but Sandy, those things those are interesting questions, but it has nothing to do with measuring.
No, that has to do with subjective experience. That's what you were saying about the Rorschach. It's about what they say about the card or whatever it is, and then how you respond to it. But the dialogue, what the conversation is that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question.
And
I have a question.
Marit and then Booth. Yeah.
Yes. Dr. Sanford, if you can please give a way to deepen the attunement. How would you deepen the attunement?
It varies for different people. It depends on where you start also, and how far you are willing to stay with the feeling that you have in a particular situation and allow yourself to see what images or thoughts derive from it. Because it has to do with your willingness to be open to your own experience as far as it goes. And notice when you don't want to go further and what that feels like. I mean, in Freud's model, the consciousness is descending and the unconscious is rising, and they hit each other. Fritz Perls called that the sick point, the sticking point. That was his way of trying to translate psychoanalysis into English. But you have to be aware of yourself, because no one can tell you how you feel inside. Only you know that. And if you decide to curate your inner experience and not look at something, then you have to be willing to know that you did that. You decided, I don't want to see that.
That's a great point, Sandy.
So basically, it's to
Yes.
practice first on your own, is like to practice first on your own, get the sense feeling, get the sense self, and then bring it to wherever you go and see what, okay, that's wonderful. I love this kind of work.
Thank you, Nguyen. Hope that helps.
And we have Booth with his hand up.
Yeah, hi, Sandy. This is unfortunate. I'm going away from a very good topic you brought up and some good points, but
Yeah.
I've never read Gendlin. You're my introduction to him, but
Okay.
you said Lang influenced you quite a bit.
Mhm.
Gendlin worked with Carl Rogers for quite a while, but they, I suppose, were contemporaries, Lang and Gendlin. Did they know each other and did they influence one another?
I wish Mike was here, because he's the one that told me this story. Because when he was working with Ronnie, as he calls him in London, he actually was involved in setting up a meeting between Lang and Rogers. And
I was talking about Gendlin and Lang, not.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, honestly, but I don't know. Excuse me, I misunderstood you.
Well, they seem to have something in common. The way you described Gendlin being quite philosophical, because
Yeah.
Lang was quite philosophical. So I thought maybe they might have.
That's a good. I'd have to ask Mike. He might know the answers to that. I'm not aware of it. I'm sure that Gendlin's well aware of Lang's work and his way of working with people. And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, personality wise, Gendlin was a very nice guy, apparently. And as you know, Ronnie could be a bit contentious. So I think Gendlin was kind of straight. And Ronnie, as you know, was more experimental, perhaps. I don't know if Gendlin ever did smoked a joint or took acid back in the old days, but I would bet that he probably didn't. But we know that Ronnie did. So, I mean, there were different generations in certain ways. I think I don't know. Maybe they might have been contemporaries. I mean, Gendlin, of course, was a university professor, at Chicago for many, many years. And Ronnie was the Bruce Springsteen of psychology for a number of years. And loved it, right? Yeah. Should get Mike to tell some of his stories about what it was like working with Lang over a long period of time, and some of the things he got to observe. In any event, it's I think you're that yeah, if you want to read some of Gendlin, if you're interested in the philosophy, Gendlin in Experiencing the Creation of Meaning goes into it in some depth. The other books that Your Body Interprets Your Dreams, which I liked, just focusing, he doesn't go into any of those underlying philosophical concepts.
Okay.
Experiencing Creation Meaning, that's a book on the experience of introversion that was written by, I think he does the introduction to that was written by, I think, a couple of doctoral students of his.
Mhm.
That there's a lot of references in that book to the philosophical things that he was most attuned to.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
and he was very thorough. Yeah, Tom.
One of the things that I think is important in Gendlin and in Heidegger in common is the idea that mood or disposition or feeling is not a subjective paint over the world like the Anglo-Saxon philosophical tradition often saw it. It reveals there's an intelligibility that's revealed through what you're calling feeling that is there. I mean, Heidegger would say that disposition reveals more than understanding initially understands. Or in Pascal's terms, the heart has its reasons, which reason doesn't know yet.
Yes.
And so there is a sense that this thing which is moving me is about something important, about something about the truth of my situation, my life, my existence, whatever, that I can't quite get at. And it deepens through the process of the therapy and trying to get at it until, you hit the spot, so to speak. So you find a satisfactory articulation of the not yet articulated something, which you're being moved by. But that something moving you is already intelligent. Intelligence isn't just a human projection onto things.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you're implying some kind of like, David Bohmian implicit order or some Neoplatonic underlying or archetypal themes that one experiences, I think there's an argument to be made. That's very.
I'm not.
Okay.
I guess the emphasis was on the word projection.
Yeah.
That part of our being is it makes us take seriously that we have to listen to feelings and to focusing. Because
well, isn't that the job of the artist and the poet? Godard said that the cinema is like X-rays; it shows us our diseases. Yes, yes. This is very, when Sartre says the issue is not that you can't know the truth about yourself. It's because you don't want to know. It's bad faith that's the issue. And of course, he's a guy that lived through World War II and the Jews being shipped off and went and stood in front of the magazine, got arrested, and said to the French people, "You all lie. You knew exactly what was going on. Don't admit it." That's a different shift. And that he, of course, in Lacan and the whole French analytical, the French new wave of cinema that was influenced by Sartre and Lacan, all those filmmakers used to go to Lacan's lectures. That's very interesting, because they basically, inhabited a world where they were, they had to deal with this stuff on a regular basis. Anyhow, I like your comments, Tom. I appreciate them. I think that I think Sartre in one of his, I forget what it was, where he railed against gustatory philosophies. I forget what, maybe that was his article on phenomenology. I'm not sure, but he said, if you see beauty in a tree or art or person, it's not because you project it onto the object or the person, it's because you inhabit it. And I thought that was his way of putting it. I think Gendlin is not that far from saying when you're doing therapy and you inhabit that room and you inhabit what's going on with this person, you do it with your whole being. And we call that subjectivity because it's how you reference yourself. Now, I find it interesting if you if you are working with somebody and there's a moment, in my experience, where whatever they've presented and you're skilled and, you know, you learn all these things, but there's a moment where whatever it is that's going on, you get past that, you know, this, the role, I'm here to help you, you're here to make the confession, and that there's something that changes. That's still true, but all of a sudden they feel met, and you know it. That's when therapy really starts, in my opinion. But again,
When,
that's
when
just me.
when they when someone feels that you felt their inner experience.
They feel that you know, you get them in somehow, that's what they want. They want to be seen in some way.
Invalidated, acknowledged.
Well, again, but it's like, you know, some people come to therapy, they don't come to therapy in order to give up all the crap that they're doing that makes their lives miserable. They come to therapy to figure out how to do it better so that it'll work. Freud called that the repetition compulsion, remember? You know, that they're not there to do something different. They're there to learn how to do what they're doing better. Your job is to convince them that it's what they're doing that leads them to be in your room saying this doesn't work. And
Yes,
gee,
sorry, Sandy. I thought you were making the point that what really is truly therapeutic or moving is when a patient feels felt by you.
Yes.
As a,
yes, yeah, I am. I'm
Oh.
saying and they get it and you get it. You both know. Right? And it doesn't always happen. It's not every time they see you, you know, crap gets in the way, you know, life goes on. But, you know, whether you're seeing once a week or 3 times a week, you know, you have your good days, you have your bad days, right? You know, many years ago, I had we're going to have to end, but I had a colleague of mine, Bob Fessler, who was at Duquesne University and did his doctoral study on, you know, therapeutic encounters. And what he did was he taped a lot of sessions, and then he took the tapes, and this is part of his research. And he had the therapists listen to the tapes in which they feel something significantly changed, and make comments about. And then he recorded their comments about that session, and he took the same tape, gave it to the patients, and had them listen to it, and listen to where, you know, and then listen to what the therapist said was going on and how important it was after he had gotten their comments. And what he found was that there was no correlation whatsoever between what the therapist thought was important and what the patient thought was important. So, you know, and so that led him to being very skeptical about being a therapist for a couple of years. But it could have been him, you know, after all. But in any event, I think that there are other studies that have replicated questions about these things, of course, which makes the field very nervous, you know, and about, well, gee, and of course, the scientific people say, you see, you don't know what really works. And all those clinical studies that you report, all these, well, that's all, you know, you've curated all that data. So you're only reporting the ones that did work. Anyhow, I think we're about to end. Thank you all for coming and your questions, and I hope it was valuable. And feel free to contact me. I think, James, you have my email address. Make sure it's the SR Dr. Sanford Rosenberg one. And any further comments or questions you have, I'd be delighted to hear them. And don't forget about the New School for Existential Psychoanalysis training program. Tell your friends.